Hello ladies and gentlemen, those otherwise inclined, my name is TheUncle82, and welcome back to What About This? This is a series where I look to rewrite, restructure, or fantasy book what has already happened or what I think could come next in various arcs and events across shows, stories, games, etc. as a way to flex and expand my own creative writing juices. On today's video, we will be looking into the ever-captivating and oftentimes frustrating series of Total Drama. But what is Total Drama? Well, first of all, like always, what are you doing here if you don't know? Secondly, Total Drama has always been, at its heart, an animated parody of reality TV survival shows, chiefly Survivor. A bunch of high school students sign up to compete in an isolated area of a Canadian reality TV show, hosted by everyone's favourite maniacal host, Chris McLean. It started with Total Drama Island, where the original 22 cast members competed in a summer camp theme for 100,000 Canadian dollars. Following an extra-long special episode, Total Drama Action arrived as the second season, where 15... Don't know where that came from. Anyway, those members of the original cast returned to compete in an abandoned film lot with film genre-related challenges for an improved $1 million cash prize, while the rest were sidelined in the newly introduced Total Drama Aftermath, which allowed viewers an insight into characters once they'd been voted off. Some people would say that nothing ever happened in those episodes, and those people would be wrong. Anyway, following Action and another extra-long special, the third season was Total Drama World Tour, generally regarded as the best season of the show. Many favourites returned, it gave life to others, a trip around the world, and they definitely didn't show favouritism to the Americas and visit them multiple times, and no sirree, and there were some fantastic musical numbers as well. 15 of the original cast compete this time, along with 2 newbies for flavour, plus an extra surprise later on. However, after 3 seasons of the same cast, they were moved aside as the second generation of competitors took centre stage. Revenge of the Island marked a couple main changes for the franchise going forwards. Chief amongst them, it saw the in-world seasons relegated down from 26 episodes to 13, with one exception, we'll get to that. The original cast, minus some cameos, was shelved as a new generation of 13 competitors competed back on Wawanaka Island after it had some toxic remodelling. Narratively, they did address the change in episodes and did what they could. Fans of the original cast didn't have to wait long for some of them to return to action though, as All Stars was the following season, where 7 from Gen 1 competed alongside 7 from Gen 2 in a Heroes vs Villains theme for the teams, returning back to the now fully quarantined Wawanaka Island, in what was an atrocious train wreck of a season. That was then followed up with a new third generation of campers, 14 in total, in all their gimmicked glory, competing on Pakatu Island, the island serving as both location and season title. And it is questionable whether or not the season actually improved on All Stars, though it did at least provide a few good characters. However, following those joint calamities, the next instalment was an extremely welcome return to form in Total Drama Presents The Redonkulous Race. Where Total Drama parodied Survivor, The Redonkulous Race parodied The Amazing Race. It offered something fresh, it returned to the 26-episode formula, and was what was the last installment for many years, suddenly became the most loved season since World Tour. Yes, last for many years. There is no Total Drama Rama. It does not exist. Then, after many years of silence, Cartoon Network ordered a reboot. 2 new 13-episode seasons of Total Drama, back to being Total Drama Island. A new cast of 16 played out in both generally well-received seasons, though it did break the tradition of having endings for all finalists winning. Now, with all that recapping, what could be the aim for this video? Well, you've already seen the title, and the last line of the recap gives that away. I will be asking, what about if a season ended with a new winner? Or, in a more traditional Total Drama fashion, what about if 2 new finalists were crowned? But which season to choose from? It'd be easy to go for something like All Stars, Action, Island, those where there's at least one really debatable finalist. But nah, I'll go for something different. So, we'll be going after Revenge of the Island. So, neither Cameron nor Lightning will make the final 2. And I'll go through the entire season getting us there. How will that work? Well, Let's see what we can do. Okay, so admin. How is this going to work? Well, obviously each season has its own problems, and Revenge of the Island is no different. I briefly touched on earlier, it's mainly the change from 26 episodes to 13. I believe a lot of the general discourse surrounding this season was that it wasn't great and the cast didn't overly impress, with a few exceptions, one in particular, but that evolved over time into the sentiment that the cast itself was actually pretty captivating. They just didn't have the time to breathe. But if we address that and return to the longer episodes, how do we then address that change? Do we hail a return of the Aftermath show to eat up some time? Do we bring in some choice characters from Puckatoo Island to add some depth to the cast? Do we just make all the challenges extra long and pad out time? They were all options, but ultimately the aim of this video specifically is not to act as a fix-it. It is to crown a new winner, or rather 2 new finalists, and show how that can be done with what we've got. So, these are the parameters I'm working with. No added cast members, we just use the 13 Gen 2 campers. No new challenges, they all appear in the season, although maybe not in the same order. And, unfortunately, we remain at 13 episodes. This has to be wrapped up just as quickly. So, let's begin. Episode 1 plays out exactly the same as it did in canon. Same teams, Stacy, Dakota, Bee, Dawn, Sam, Scott and Lightning on the toxic rats, and Brick, Anne-Maria, Mike, Joe, Zoe and Cameron on the mutant maggots. It features the same challenge, plays out the same way, and like in the show, Chatterbox Stacy is gone, with none of the really interesting parts of her character being touched on. Seriously, go have a look at her biographies. Hell, look at all of them online. They're quite an interesting read. Like episode 1, episode 2 is also much the same, with the same challenge and fallout. There isn't really too much to touch on or change in the first 2 episodes. It doesn't really change anything for this narrative. Dakota is, to her, eliminated way too early. As for Dakota Zoid, we'll get to that. Episode 3 also plays out much the same here, which, unfortunately, means we say goodbye to Bee once again. However, there is a slight difference. I think the vast majority believe that this vote count is 4-1 to Bee, with Scott getting Bee's vote. I disagree. It's a 3-1-1 situation, with Sam getting the other vote. Why? Well, because of this.
Bee might have messed with the challenge, but Sam messed with the lightning. Time for Thunder to say bye-bye. Hey, can somebody write that down?
Here I'd get rid of that, instead adding just a little extra onto that scene where Scott is convincing the rats to vote Bee off. As Scott walks back, Bee rushes up and tries to get their attention, but the team walks away. But one looks back. We'll get to who that is. Anyway, this now turns the vote to 3 votes to 2, with Chris publicly announcing that tally. Bee still gets eliminated, but Scott now knows someone's watching him. I'm sure you'll start to get sick of hearing this, but episode 4 plays out much the same as in the show. Well, the challenge does, anyway. There are 2 things that get changed here. The first is Scott's attitude. Whether it's at the end of the previous episode or at the start of this one, Scott talks in the confessional about Chris announcing the tally. Someone's onto him. Maybe it's best for him to lay low for now and try to suss out who it is that didn't believe him. So while Scott wouldn't be as exaggeratedly helpful, he's at least not sabotaging them this challenge, lending a bit more weight to the rats' victory here. The second difference, and the one that most diverts from the canon from here on out, happens at the elimination ceremony. Like in the show, Brick volunteers for elimination for his failure to follow his code, SIR! However, this time, Chris refuses, revealing that while he would normally consider that, this isn't an elimination round, so no one goes home. And, since the votes have already been cast, his platoon will decide whether he gets to stay or be transferred over. The vote goes to Joe. Brick would likely vote for himself, Joe would vote for either Brick or Cam, cut the dead weight, but Mike, Zoe, Cameron and Anne-Maria are all likely to vote for Joe, so Joe gets sent over to the toxic rats. Admittedly, Zoe and Anne-Maria could vote for one another, which opens up the possibility of a tiebreaker for Joe and Brick, but I don't think that's quite as likely right now. With Joe now over on the rats, episode 5 plays out with the same challenge, but a different result. Joe would take over the goal cannon, and with Lightning grabbing the driver's seat, Scott gets stuck skiing with Dawn and Sam, and despite his attempts to subtly sabotage from the rear, the two jocks perform well, plus he's somehow unable to throw Dawn off from the skis, that the rats easily take it. With the maggots in the ceremony, the elimination falls to Anne-Maria. Sorry to any of her fans watching, but it makes the most sense. Mike, Zoe and Cameron would all vote for her, though I could see Vito trying to take over to vote for someone else to save his girl, but Brick would probably vote against her as well, nullifying that if it was successful. On to episode 6. While the eliminations will stay the same, sorry Sam, this time the challenges will be different, partly because I feel having any animal-based team challenge while Dawn is still around is basically an easy win for her team, what with her innate connection with nature. Instead, we'll be bringing forward the challenges in Eat, Puke and Be Wary. For the cooking challenge, both teams have to prepare 2 meals, with Chris, Chef and DJ judging. We know how that turns out.
Well, looks like we just lost our taste test.
For the rats, it's the living salad prepared by Dawn and Sam, while Scott, Lightning and Joe go for the Southern Quiche surprise. Lightning tries to add more protein into it. For the maggots, Cameron and Zoe make the toxic mushroom quiche, while Brick and Mike go for the meaty dish. Forced to eat the meal themselves, Scott attempts to sabotage the living salad with poison ivy, which heavily affects Sam, but Dawn is somehow fine. Without realising that, he manages to power through the froggy quiche without too much help from Lightning or Joe, that the rats take the first round. Dork Hunter returns for the second part, with the maggots receiving their tracking collars here. Despite this, the maggots win, as Cameron still disables the tracking collars while Sam, still reeling from the ivy, takes a pummeling from Chef's Pasta Blaster. Despite Dawn's efforts to convince the others to bring down Scott, it's revealed here that she was the one who sided with B. No real surprise there. Sam still gets voted out. If you're concerned about the missing scene where Sam asks Dakota for fashion advice, you could flip it here where Sam instead asks Dakota if she knows what sort of dishes Chris and Chef may like, what with her being an intern now. Following Sam's elimination, Chris once again asked for a strong member from each team. From the maggots, Brick is the obvious choice here. For the rats, well, I was torn heavily between Joe and Scott, but I think Scott would beat out Joe here just. Plus, it makes the next challenge a lot easier. Like in the show, they swap teams, bringing Brick over to a slightly more tumultuous team, while Scott heads over to try and break up the tight trio of Zoe, Mike and Cameron. Despite the team switch, episode 7 plays out much the same. Same challenge, same eliminated competitor. Or, rather, the same removed competitor. Here's why. Like in the show, Brick would still absolutely aid the opposing team, even despite it potentially costing them the challenge. This accounts for the rats' trophy breaking. As for the maggots, well, with Scott now on that team, he's free to toss it wherever he pleases, especially with Mike, Cameron and Zoe all incapacitated by radiation and giant naked mole rats. This leads to both teams failing the challenge, and while Chris would rather have both teams vote off a competitor here, legal steps in. Brick, in defending the enemy, plus dealing with Ezekiel, if I may, has received injuries that have broken through his flesh. Considering this all happened in an irradiated zone, Brick is required to be monitored and is therefore medevaced out. Considering that situation, Chris throws the rats a bone and gives them the furious bald Dakota. If you want to vote elimination here, you could have Scott toss the statue, but it luckily lands in Cameron's hoodie, but it makes it harder to bring Dakota back in that scenario. Now, if you're familiar with the season, you'll no doubt be asking, hang on Thor, wasn't there a double elimination this episode? What happens there? And you'd be right, there was a double elimination here. Now there's not, because it doesn't really make much sense to do that with these current members. unless you maybe want someone like Cameron to also be taken out medically, but I don't think that quite fits right. If you still want to do it here, I've given you the bone of both teams failing the challenge, so you could pick one from either team to go. Just wait till the end to decide that. You'll need to know the finalists. My double elimination comes in later. And it won't be immediately, as episode 8 is just the sole elimination. And the same elimination. That of Dakotazoid. But there are some things that need to be explained, what with her now being on a different team. So, how does this play out? Well, the first part of the challenge does play out much the same, with one change, as Dawn takes Zoe's place of consoling the emotional and mutating Dakota. Cameron's ingenuity and calculations nab the maggots the win, like it did in the show. Dakota on the losing team has its pros and cons. Pros? Dakota's rapid mutation has made it so she is too large for the weighted waist cuffs, and even if they can be applied elsewhere on her body, the added weight is negligible to her. Cons? She goes rushing off in a blind panic thanks to the knowledge that Sam and Gwen, yes both, is buried alive, and her team now doesn't have the information pointing to where they could be. And with Dawn desperately trying to calm Dakotazoid and Lightning getting beaten down by the mutated swamp life, that leaves Joe up against the maggots, even with Scott trying to sabotage them. Now, this is still a similar situation in canon, so how do we get a different result? Well, you could have Dakotazoid burst out of the swamp at rapid speed, barreling into Joe, who is digging in the right spot, and knocking down the maggots, flinging everyone and everything every which way to try and dig up Sam. This includes sending Mike and Zoe over to where Joe had been digging. They win the challenge, though Dakota still breaks down the chest. At the elimination, it's 3 votes to 1 to Dakota, with even Dawn voting against her. Dawn reasons that the darkness that she sensed has already consumed Dakota, and she won't find any help by remaining in the shadows. That takes care of Dakotazoid, but also, and far more importantly, Scott doesn't lose his invincibility statue to do it. Yes, he still finds it, and it's still in play. And following that, like in canon, the teams merge. Making it to the merge are Mike, Zoe, Cameron, Joe, Lightning, Scott, and Dawn. Admittedly, the same as in the show, plus Dawn as the extra character with no double eliminations. But we've done a bit of tinkering around to shift some of the power dynamics, plus, regardless of what's going to happen, Dawn has been more involved in this season, not just through time spent, but also within challenges. That handles criticism of her incredible popularity for the little time she spent on the show, and, honestly, would probably grow her popularity even more if it's done right. Oh, and Scott still has the immunity idol. Remember that. With the teams now merged at episode 9, we do another challenge shuffle, this time moving up the aerial obstacle course. Most of this plays much the same as in the show, I am using that a lot, but it does lend credence to the idea that the show was decent, just not paced well. For differences, I could see Dawn getting Scott's part of needing to build a bird, and pulling it off a lot easier than he did, again, her natural affinity towards fauna and flora, leaving Scott either with something like a glider that needs propulsion off the ground, a la the Redonkulous race, or a house as a nod to Up. Keep most everything about bringing down the Zeppelin. Dawn can help Zoe bring around the mutant fire-breathing goats, plus Heather is not only a delight but also very justified here. Joe gets eliminated, keeping that backstabbing scene. In case you're not sure on the numbers, Lightning and Scott would definitely vote for her, along with Cameron. Dawn will vote for Scott, as will Mike, and Zoe's a toss-up, but she'd still be a bit reluctant to vote for Scott at this stage. Oh, and Joe would probably vote for Lightning. The challenge shuffle basically just switches these two challenges around as Grand Chef Auto comes in for episode 10. Here, Scott plays the blackmail card he did in canon, luring in Cameron and gaining Mike's mileage. In place of Joe's stop-start driving, I think it makes sense for Dawn to fall into that blunder, and a blunder it could be, because here is where the double elimination comes in. Like in the show, whoever completely tags all of the monuments gains immunity and the sole vote at the elimination ceremony. However, for the second elimination, Because Chris doesn't just want people to take it easy if they think they can't win, whoever would be the last to completely tag the monuments is automatically eliminated. Do not go to Bonfire, immediately collect Toxic Marshmallow. And to be specific, we are avoiding a Season 1 Lindsay moment. The race does not end until all bar one of the contestants have completely tagged the monument. Again, completely tagged. Like in canon, Scott wins, even with the mess that is Chef and Duncan messing with Mount Chrismore. Dawn pulls up slowly, constantly sticking her brakes, believing she's out. But she's not. Because whatever you tagged on the first monument was what you needed to tag on every monument. Cameron's initial tag, while beautifully crafted and applied, cost him not just time then and there, but throughout the challenge itself, and he never replicated it again on the other two monuments. That is Chris being a stickler for the wording of the rules. Cameron is immediately eliminated, and like in the show, Scott uses his vote to get rid of Mike. That trio of Zoe, Mike and Cameron is down to one in just a single challenge, though Mike and Zoe do still get to confess to one another. Episode 11 is where the fashion runway challenge that officially was way back in episode 6 comes forward into play. And with the remaining contestants being Dawn, Zoe, Scott and Lightning, I see Dawn absolutely smashing this. Not only is she the best suited for finding an animal model, but if you keep the Yeti abducting Lindsay as an added on challenge, then she should succeed there above all others. Although admittedly her biggest challenge would be getting up there, though there could always be a shortcut. Anyway, Dawn wins here, and Dawn, Zoe and surprisingly Lightning all vote for Scott. But recall what I told you to remember. Scott still has the invincibility statue. It gets played here. Now, I had a tough time picking between who out of Zoe and Lightning goes out here. Ultimately, I figured that Scott would look to separate a duo gunning for him here more than a major solo threat. Granted, he did try to get Lightning out in the show, but I wouldn't put it past him to rate Dawn as a stronger opponent than Cameron, albeit by a slim margin. Not to mention, she's been gunning for him since episode 3. He definitely would have noticed by now. Ultimately, Zoe goes out here. Episode 12 is the scavenger hunt, and while Dawn tries to bring Lightning some sense, she can't reach the overconfident jock. While Lightning does initially get the flower and carries it most of the way to the finish line, Scott ultimately sneaks the win here. And here, he would definitely choose to take Dawn to the finale over the physical threat that is Lightning. Also, considering this was about getting a new winner and 2 new finalists, Lightning has to be the one to go here. Now, as I said, I did initially start this with the idea of showing how one person could win, and I don't think it's that big of a surprise that Dawn was that person. But in true Total Drama fashion, at least until the reboots, we've had the tradition of both finalists getting a victory ending. So while Dawn is very much my preference, I have prepared a win for Scott as well. We'll first deal with Dawn's, then go to where it deviates for Scott. Episode 13 and our finale starts with the same pomp and circumstance that Chris brings, the Roman garb, the whole shebang. As for the videos from home, they couldn't find Dawn's parents. No explanation is made, though I could certainly theorise. But weirdly, an owl flew overhead and dropped a videotape onto Chris's head. Playing the tape, it's a recording from Dawn's treehouse, where she filmed her audition tape. A bunch of animals all cry out and flock in a view, which Dawn gets a little teary-eyed over. McLean abruptly ends the footage. It's too goody-goody for a Total Drama finale. Scott's live footage comes from his family's dirt farm, and has his pop on a rather heavily worn couch. He doesn't really say a lot. The family hasn't been watching the show. Good on Scott for making it to the end. He'd better win and bring that dough home. The harvest has been real bad this year. It's all a bit messy and awkward, and like Dawn's, Chris doesn't really know what to make of it. Though he is at least a little happier this one has some drama to it. The challenge starts out the same, with both being able to sift through the massive pile of junk and traps to craft whatever they need for the gladiatorial combat. Scott's preparation is fairly simple. He thinks he's got this in the bag, so doesn't overly worry too much about defence. He does trigger quite a few traps within the piles, which hinders him, but with his trapping experience he does also manage to disarm some of them to utilise himself, either by moving and rearming them elsewhere, or breaking them down for his own weapons. On the other hand, Dawn doesn't craft any weapons for herself. She does grab some rope, vegetation, and the recorder Sam used in episode 3, and unlike Scott, she manages to avoid and dodge every trap that she comes near, her senses acting like they did with the mystery snowballs, again in episode 3. The fight begins and Scott immediately presses the attack, constantly trying to ensnare and trap Dawn and lead her into his traps, though he does also try physically attacking her as well. It's all for naught as Dawn easily evades his every attempt, even managing to send him into his own traps. He does manage to avoid most of them just in time, though is less lucky with any of Chris's remaining traps, which starts to wear him down. Chris is, as usual, bored of the cat and mouse game and starts to release the mutated animals, though Dawn is able to keep them calm so they don't go after her, but a few do attack Scott. The cannon ends up being pointed to Scott and he gets under the barrel, lifting it just enough to avoid him, but instead fires towards Chris, which results in the smashed remote and the chaos ensuing from all the released mutants. Scott is focused on trying to protect himself at first, avoiding the swarm and expecting Dawn to be consumed by the carnage. Looking over, he's instead shocked as Dawn rushes in to save everyone, calming down the creatures however she can, even playing the recorder way more skillfully than Sam did to soothe them en masse. As she's playing, Scott lunges at her from behind, finally getting a hit on her as he grabs her and tackles her to the ground, but his pit is broken as Fang runs up behind him. Scott screams and runs while Fang chases him, and this is where the paths diverge for the endings. For Dawn's victory, Scott manages to get a stink bomb off in Fang's face, making the mutated shark wheeze and gag. But before Scott can escape, he gets caught by a lasso from Dawn, slinging him back, and Scott can only scream as the recovered shark leaps on him, with a beatdown happening off screen. Fang triumphantly holds up his broken tooth, reapplying it to complete his mouth. Remember, this only happened in the show when Scott was eliminated, so we take care of it here, before he puts all his weight down on the battered dirt farmer. The shark waits for Dawn to come over and she pins him, getting the 3 count and winning the season. Applause, applause, cheers and confetti. Over by the docks, Dawn is handed the $1 million and boards the boat with the rest of the competitors, saying how she plans to use the money, along with funds gained by selling the trinkets she's collected over the season, to raise a charity for the mutated creatures on the island, along with some other worthy causes. Although she may also be able to keep a little aside to help her fellow competitors with their noble causes. And from there we get the same ending. Boat sails off into the sunset, Chris gets blown up as Chef reverses his Uno, and the Environmental Protection Agency detains Chris and quarantines the island, leading into All Stars. Credits roll, fade to black. Except this is total drama. Tradition dictates 2 endings. So, how does Scott win? Well, going back to that split-off point when Fang joins the fight and chases Scott, Scott manages to run over towards one of his own snare traps and deftly leaps over it. Fang is not so lucky and is caught, flung up before being slung down into Dawn, trapping the Moonchild underneath him. No matter how much she struggles, Dawn is unable to free herself from under Fang as Scott rushes over and pins her for the 3 count, taking the crown for himself. As Scott celebrates, Dawn consoles a downtrodden Fang, assuring them that she doesn't blame him, before being consoled herself by her circle of friends, be Zoe, Mike and Cameron are the more likely ones here. You can have her drop her line of the universe not wanting her to win such a perverse game here, while assuring Fang that karma will get her justice. On the docks, Scott is awarded his $1 million winnings and steps onto the boat with the rest of the competitors, but when asked about his plans for the money, he holds the briefcase behind him at full stretch, telling them, "Back off, this money is all mine." Just then, Fang leaps up from the water and chomps down on his arms. Scott screams and jerks back, his arms coming loose, but without the briefcase. Scott yells at Fang as his head floats just above the water. He grins and points to his missing tooth. Scott growls and tosses him the tooth, demanding the briefcase back. Fang nods and spits the case back as Scott throws him the shark tooth. The tooth is reattached. Scott opens the briefcase to find no money inside. After all, he only demanded the briefcase, not the money. Malicious compliance wins again! Fang finger waves and quickly dives away as Scott screams at him to give him his money. And as the boat suddenly jolts forwards, he falls and loses grip on the case, it falling into the water as well. Slightly harsh on Scott, but it would definitely give him motivation going into the next season. And like before, dock explosion, EPA detainment, island quarantine, well, credits. But yeah, that's how I would write Total Drama Revenge of the Island with new finalists, specifically Dawn winning, but by extension Scott winning as well. What do you think? Feel free to tell me in the comments below. You can also suggest topics for future What About This videos. Can be for Total Drama, can be for other series. I'm not 100% sure which one will be my next topic, though I could always go back and do that extended Pokemon Masters 8 League format for my first What About This video. Feel free to check that one out as well. Regardless, as always, I've been TheWrongLady2, feel free to like, comment and subscribe. If you want to find me elsewhere, the links will be in the description below, along with a link to my Total Drama fanfic, Total Drama Destination Stardom. I should hopefully get the next chapter out in a couple of weeks, if it's not out already, but it'll be a big one. It's currently looking to be about 30,000 plus words or so. Anyway, I'll see you all next time. Bye guys.